Use a warm, empathetic Tonima Thompson stood at her office window, looking out at the busy London streets below. At 35 years old, she had come a long way from the tiny flat where she grew up with just her mother. Back then, they had barely enough money for food and rent. Her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep them going. Emma remembered nights when her stomach growled with hunger. But her mother would smile and say they were saving money for Emma's future. Those hard times taught Emma something important. She learned that everyone deserves respect and kindness, no matter where they come from or what they look like. When she started Thompson Tech Solutions from her kitchen table 10 years ago, she promised herself she would create a company where everyone felt welcome. Now Emma was the boss of hundreds of people. Her company helped other businesses with their computer problems. She had offices in 5 cities across England. But even with all her success, she never forgot what it felt like to be poor and powerless for the past 6 months. Something had been bothering Emma deeply. She kept getting phone calls and emails from people who had tried to get jobs at her Manchester office. These people were mostly women and people from different racial backgrounds. They all told similar stories about the branch manager there, a man named James Walker. He made me feel so small. One woman had cried over the phone. He asked me questions that had nothing to do with the job. He made comments about my accent and where I was from. Another caller, a young man named David, had said, Mr. Walker kept staring at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. He told me that people like me might not fit in with their team culture. Emma had tried to investigate these complaints through normal company procedures. She sent her human resources team to Manchester. She asked for reports and documentation. But somehow, James Walker always managed to make the complaints disappear. He was smart and careful. He never put anything in writing that could get him in trouble. The more Emma heard these stories, the angrier she became. She thought about her own struggles to get her first job years ago. She remembered how nervous she had felt, how much she needed the chance to prove herself. The idea that James Walker was stealing those chances from other people made her feel sick. Emma had confronted James directly during video calls. He always had smooth answers ready. These people just weren't qualified. He would say with a cold smile, I have to maintain our company's standards, don't I? But something in his eyes told Emma he was lying, after weeks of thinking about the problem. Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. She would go undercover. She would pretend to be a job seeker and see exactly how James Walker treated people when he thought no one important was watching. Emma spent days preparing for our secret mission. She bought simple clothes from a discount store, a plain black skirt, a white blouse that had seen better days, and shoes that looked worn. She put her expensive jewelry in a drawer and tied her hair back in a simple ponytail. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She created a fake resume under the name Emma Brown. She gave herself basic qualifications, just enough to be considered for an entry-level position. She even practiced speaking differently, making her voice sound less confident than usual. On Tuesday morning, Emma drove to Manchester instead of taking her usual first-class train. Her hands shook a little as she parked her old car. She had borrowed it from her assistant. Outside the office building, this was her company, her building. But today she felt like a stranger. Walking through the glass doors, Emma noticed things she had never seen before during her official visits. The security guard barely looked up at her in the elevator. Other people in expensive suits glanced at her simple clothes and looked away quickly. Emma realized this was how most job seekers felt every day. Invisible and judged. The receptionist, Margaret, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. Emma had met her during company events, but Margaret clearly did not recognize her today. "Good morning, dear," Margaret said warmly. "You must be here for the interview with Mr. Walker. Please have a seat, and he'll see you shortly." Emma sat in the waiting area, watching employees hurry past with their coffee cups and important-looking papers. None of them paid any attention to her. She thought about her grandmother, who had died when Emma was 15. Grandma Rose had cleaned offices just like this one every night for 30 years. She came home exhausted, her hands rough from scrubbing floors, but she never complained. "Stay strong. Love." Grandma Rose used to tell Emma when things got difficult. "The world tries to make some people feel small, but remember, you're just as good as anyone else. Justice finds a way, even when it takes time." After 20 minutes of waiting, James Walker appeared. Emma had seen him before during video meetings, but seeing him in person was different. He was a tall man in his 40s with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit. But his smile was cold as ice as he looked Emma up and down like she was something unpleasant he had stepped in. "Emma Brown, is it?" he said in a voice that sounded friendly but felt mean. "Well, let's see what you're about then." As Emma followed him toward his office, she whispered a silent prayer for strength. She was about to face something that would test everything she believed about justice and human dignity. But she also knew that whatever happened next could help protect other people from feeling the pain she was about to experience. Use a warm, empathetic tone. Emma followed James Walker into his office, her heart beating fast. The room was large and fancy, with dark wooden furniture and expensive paintings on the walls. James had a huge desk that made him look important, and behind it was a big leather chair that seemed to swallow him up when he sat down. "Please, take a seat," James said, pointing to a small plastic chair in front of his desk. Emma noticed that her chair was much lower than his, making her feel like a child talking to a grown-up. She realized this was probably not an accident. James picked up Emma's fake resume and barely looked at it before putting it down again. He leaned back in his big chair and studied her face with cold eyes that made her feel uncomfortable. "So, Emma Brown," he began, saying her fake name like he did not believe it was real. "Tell me about yourself. And I mean really tell me. Where are you from originally?" Emma had practiced this answer many times. "I was born in London, Mr. Walker. I grew up in the East End and went to school there." James raised one eyebrow. "The East End. Interesting neighborhood. Lots of different types of people there." The way he said different made Emma's stomach turn. She knew exactly what he meant, and it was not nice. "I have 5 years of customer service experience," Emma said, trying to keep the conversation focused on work. "I also have excellent computer skills, and I learn new software very quickly." James laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. "Customer service, right? Well, I suppose that's suitable for someone like you." He paused and looked at her again with those cold eyes. "Though I have to wonder if our clients would be comfortable with someone who—" He did not finish the sentence, but Emma understood. He was suggesting that clients might not want to work with someone who looked like her or came from where she came from. Emma felt her face get hot with anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. She was here to help other people, not to lose her temper. "I've always received excellent reviews from customers," Emma said quietly. "They've told my supervisors that I'm helpful and professional." James waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. Yes, I'm sure. But let's talk about more important things. Tell me about your family situation. Are you married? Do you have children? What does your husband do for work?" Emma knew these questions were not legal to ask during a job interview. Employers were not supposed to ask about family or personal relationships. But she answered anyway, playing her role. "I'm not married, Mr. Walker. I live alone, and I don't have children. Single," James said with a nasty smile. "That explains a lot. And what about your parents? What kind of work do they do?" "My mother worked as a cleaner," Emma replied honestly, thinking of her real childhood. "My father wasn't round when I was growing up." James nodded like this was exactly what he expected to hear. "I see. So you come from a challenging background. Tell me, do you have any friends or boyfriends who might cause problems?" "We can't have employees who bring drama to the workplace." Emma's hands started to shake with anger. These questions had nothing to do with whether she could do the job. James was trying to make her feel ashamed of who she was and where she came from. "I keep my personal life separate from work," Emma said, her voice still steady but getting harder to control. The questions got worse and worse. James asked about where she lived, how much rent she paid, and whether she had ever been in trouble with the police. He asked about her education, and then made comments suggesting that schools in her area were not very good. Every question felt like a small attack designed to make her feel small and worthless. When Emma tried to steer the conversation back to her job qualifications, James would interrupt her or ignore what she said completely. It was clear that he had already decided she was not good enough, probably from the moment she walked in the door. After about 30 minutes of these awful questions, James suddenly stood up from his chair. Emma watched as he walked round his big desk and came to stand next to a small plastic chair. He was much taller than her, and standing so close made her feel trapped and frightened. "Listen, sweetheart," James said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The word sweetheart sounded mean coming from his mouth, not kind like when her grandmother used to say it. "I'm trying to help you understand how things work here at Thompson Tech Solutions." Emma looked up at him, feeling very small, in her low chair while he towered over her. "I understand that I need to show I'm qualified for the position," she said. James laughed that cold laugh again. "Oh, my dear girl, this isn't really about qualifications, is it? This is about fitting in. This is about whether you understand your place." He moved even closer, and Emma could smell his expensive cologne mixed with coffee breath. "Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more relaxed," James continued. "I know a quiet little restaurant where we could have dinner and really get to know each other. What do you say?" Emma's whole body went cold. She knew this was completely wrong and inappropriate. No job interview should ever include an invitation to dinner, especially not the way James was suggesting it. "I'd prefer to keep this professional, Mr. Walker," Emma managed to say. Even though her voice was shaking now, James laughed, and this time it was loud and mean. "Professional," he repeated. "Look round you. Love. I decide what's professional in this office. I decide what the rules are. And most importantly, I decide who gets hired and who goes home empty-handed." He moved closer still, and Emma felt truly scared for the first time. She thought about all the other women who had sat in this same chair, facing this same man's cruelty and power games. How many of them had been too frightened to report what happened? How many had gone home feeling broken and worthless? But Emma had something those other women did not have. She had the power to stop James Walker forever. She just had to be strong enough to get through this terrible experience so she could gather the evidence needed to protect everyone else. Use a warm, empathetic tone. James Walker woke up that Wednesday morning feeling like he owned the world. He had slept well after yesterday's interview with that nervous woman, Emma Brown. He felt satisfied with how he had handled her, showing her exactly who was in charge at his office. As he shaved and got dressed in his expensive suit, James smiled at himself in the mirror. He liked the feeling of power that came from putting people in their place during his drive to work. James thought about how easy it had been to make Emma Brown squirm in her chair. She had looked so scared and helpless when he stood over her. He remembered the way her voice shook when she tried to refuse his dinner invitation. Women like her needed to learn that they could not just walk into his office and expect to be treated as equals. James parked his car in his special parking spot that had his name painted on it in gold letters. He walked through the office building lobby, nodding at the security guard who always greeted him respectfully. In the elevator, he whistled a happy tune. Today felt like it was going to be another good day, where he could remind everyone who the boss really was. But when the elevator doors opened on his floor, James noticed something strange right away. There were people everywhere who did not normally work in his office. Men and women in very expensive-looking suits were walking around carrying clipboards and cameras. Some of them had briefcases and were taking pictures of different areas of the office. James felt a small worry start to grow in his stomach, but he pushed it away. These were probably just people from the main company office doing some kind of routine check. He was the manager here, and he had nothing to worry about. His branch always made good money for the company. Margaret, the receptionist, was sitting at her desk looking very nervous. Her usually cheerful face was pale and worried. When she saw James approaching, she stood up quickly. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," Margaret said in a voice that was quieter than usual. "Morning, Margaret," James replied, trying to sound casual. "What's all this activity about? Looks like we have visitors today." Margaret glanced round nervously before answering. "It's a corporate audit, Mr. Walker. People from the main office in London. They arrived very early this morning and they've been asking lots of questions." James felt that worry in his stomach grow a little bigger, but he kept his voice steady. "An audit? That's fine. We have nothing to hide here. Everything is running smoothly. They want to see you right away," Margaret continued, her hands shaking slightly as she shuffled some papers on her desk. "In conference room A, they said it was very important and couldn't wait." James straightened his tie and smoothed down his hair. He was probably just going to answer some routine questions about office procedures and employee performance. Maybe they wanted to congratulate him on his branch's success. After all, his office did make a lot of money for the company. "Well then, I'd better not keep them waiting," James said with a confident smile. "Thanks for the heads up, Margaret," as James walked down the hallway toward conference room. He noticed that several of his employees were watching him. They quickly looked away when he made eye contact, which struck him as odd. Usually people said good morning to him or at least nodded respectfully. Today everyone seemed to be avoiding him. James opened the door to conference room and stepped inside. The room was full of people he did not recognize, all sitting round the big conference table. They were wearing expensive suits and had serious expressions on their faces. Some had laptops open in front of them. Others had thick folders full of papers, but it was the person sitting at the head of the table who made James feel like he had been hit by a truck. It was Emma Brown from yesterday's interview, but she looked completely different. Gone were the cheap clothes and nervous posture. This woman was wearing an elegant dark blue business suit that probably cost more than James made in a month. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she sat with the kind of confidence that only came from real power. James felt his legs turn toward her. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," the woman said in a calm, clear voice that was nothing like the shaky voice from yesterday. "Please, have a seat." I don't believe we were properly introduced yesterday during our interview. James slowly sank into the chair, feeling like he might faint. His face had gone completely white, and his hands were shaking. "I'm Emma Thompson," the woman continued, her eyes never leaving his face. "I'm the CEO of Thompson Tech Solutions. Your boss, James. Actually, I'm your boss's boss's boss." The room was completely silent except for the sound of James trying to breathe normally. He felt like the walls were closing in round him. Everything he thought he knew about yesterday's interview, about power, about being in control, was crashing down like a house of cards. Emma opened a folder that was sitting in front of her on the table. "Yesterday's interview was quite educational. James. May I call you James? After all, we're so much more familiar now, aren't we?" She pulled out a small recording device and placed it in the center of the table. James stared at it like it was a dangerous animal. "You see, James, I've been hearing complaints about your interview techniques for months. Women and minorities telling me that they felt unwelcome and discriminated against. But you were always so careful not to leave any evidence, weren't you?" Emma pressed the play button on the recording device. Suddenly James's own voice filled the room. Crystal clear and unmistakable. Every nasty comment he had made, every inappropriate question, every moment when he had tried to intimidate and humiliate Emma was captured perfectly. "So, Emma, tell me about your background. We like to know what kind of people we're dealing with here. Customer service, eh? Well, I suppose that's suitable for someone like you. Maybe we could discuss this further over dinner. I know, a quiet place where we could talk more privately." James watched in horror as the executives round the table took notes and shook their heads in disgust. He tried to speak, to explain, to make excuses, but no words would come out of his mouth. This recording, along with witness statements from previous job candidates and documented complaints, paints a very clear picture of your management style. Emma continued, her voice steady and professional but filled with quiet power. James finally found his voice, but it came out as a whisper. You tricked me." Emma leaned back in her chair and looked at him with cold eyes. "I gave you the chance to treat a job seeker with basic human dignity. James, you chose to show your true character instead. The only person who tricked you was yourself." Use a warm, empathetic tone. Emma looked directly at James Walker across the conference table. Her voice was calm and steady, like a judge reading a verdict in court. "Your employment with Thompson Tech Solutions is terminated immediately, James. Security will escort you from the building within the next 10 minutes. You can also expect legal action regarding the harassment and discrimination complaints that have been filed against you." James finally found his voice, though it came out high and shaky. "You can't do this to me. You trapped me. This whole thing was a setup. This isn't legal." Emma's expression did not change at all. She looked at him with the same calm, professional manner she had maintained throughout the entire meeting. "What isn't legal, Mr. Walker, is everything you did yesterday during our interview. What isn't legal is everything you've been doing to job seekers for months, every person you've humiliated, every person you've discriminated against, every person you've made feel worthless simply because of who they are or where they come from. But you lied about who you were," James shouted, his face turning red. "You pretended to be someone else. I presented myself as a job seeker, which I was," Emma replied calmly. "I was seeking to find the truth about what happens in this office, and you showed me exactly who you really are when you thought no one important was watching." Two security guards entered the room at that moment. They were polite but firm as they stood on either side of James's chair. "Mr. Walker, we need you to come with us now. One of them said quietly. James looked round the room at all the executives who were watching him. Some looked disgusted. Others looked sad. But none of them looked like they felt sorry for him. He realized that his career at Thompson Tech Solutions was over, and probably his career anywhere else too. Word would spread quickly in their industry about what had happened. As the security guards helped James stand up from his chair, Emma spoke one more time. I want you to think about all the people whose dreams you crushed, James. All the talented individuals who deserved a fair chance, but never got one because of your prejudice. I hope someday you can find it in yourself to understand the harm you've caused. James was escorted out of the conference room, and Emma could hear his footsteps echoing down the hallway as he was led away from the office he would never see again after James was gone. Emma asked all the Manchester office employees together. In the main work area, about 40 people came together, looking nervous and confused. Many of them had heard rumors about what was happening, but no one was sure what it all meant. Emma stood in front of her employees, looking at faces she had never seen before but felt responsible for protecting. These were people who had been working under James Walker's management, dealing with his attitudes and behavior every day. I want you all to know why I did what I did today, Emma began, her voice warm but strong. For too long, this office has been a place where some people felt unwelcome, a place where talent was ignored because of prejudice and discrimination. That ends right now. Today, several employees began to cry quietly. Some looked relieved. Others looked scared about what changes might be coming. Emma could see the mix of emotions on their faces. Margaret, the receptionist, slowly raised a shaking hand. Emma nodded at her to speak. Miss Thompson, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper, I want to apologize to you. I knew something was wrong with how Mr. Walker treated people. I saw how he acted during interviews, how he spoke about certain job candidates after they left. But I was afraid to speak up. I'm 53 years old, and I needed this job to support my family. I was scared that if I complained, I would be fired too. Emma's expression softened completely when she heard Margaret's words. She walked over to where Margaret was standing and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Margaret, you have absolutely nothing to apologize for, Emma said sincerely. Fear of losing our jobs, fear of not being able to pay our bills or support our families. That fear makes us all vulnerable. It makes us feel like we have to stay quiet even when we see wrong things happening. But I want you to know that together, we can create a workplace where no one has to choose between keeping their dignity and keeping their job. Over the next several weeks, Emma spent a lot of time at the Manchester office. She implemented many new policies to make sure nothing like James Walker's behavior could happen again. She set up anonymous reporting systems so employees could report problems without fear of losing their jobs. She arranged for diversity and sensitivity training for all managers. She also made sure that corporate executives would visit each office regularly, not just for special occasions. Emma promoted Margaret to office manager, recognizing her years of hard work and quiet competence. Margaret had been doing much more than just answering phones. She had been helping new employees feel welcome and solving problems that James had ignored. In the weeks following James's firing, 3 other employees found the courage to come forward with their own stories about his inappropriate behavior. One was a young man named Robert who said James had made comments about his accent and background. Another was a woman named Sarah who said James had asked her personal questions about her family life that made her uncomfortable. The third was an older employee named David who said James had made jokes about his age and suggested he should consider retirement. Emma made sure each of these employees received support and counseling if they wanted it. She also reviewed their job evaluations to make sure James's prejudices had not affected their career advancement unfairly. The atmosphere in the Manchester office began to change dramatically. People started smiling more and talking to each other more openly. Productivity increased because employees felt safer and more valued. The office began to feel like a real team instead of a group of people just trying to avoid their boss's anger. Emma also started something called the Fair Chance Legal Fund to help employees at other companies report workplace discrimination. She used James Walker's case as an example, showing that even powerful managers could be held accountable for their actions. The story was covered in business newspapers and magazines, becoming a case study about corporate responsibility and the importance of protecting all employees from discrimination and harassment. User warm. Empathetic to me. 6 months had passed since the terrible day when James Walker was fired from Thomson Tech Solutions. Emma Thompson stood in the same Manchester office where she had once sat in a small plastic chair, feeling scared and humiliated. But now, everything was completely different. The office buzzed with happy energy. Emma could hear people laughing as they worked together on projects. The sound of friendly conversation filled the air instead of the fearful whispers that used to echo through the hallways when James was in charge. The walls were covered with colorful photos showing employee achievements, birthday celebrations, and community service projects that the office had organized together. Margaret walked up to Emma with a bright smile on her face. At 53 years old, Margaret looked younger and happier than she had in years. As the new office manager, she wore her confidence like a comfortable sweater. "Miss Thompson, I have some wonderful news to share with you," Margaret said, holding a folder full of papers. "I wanted to show you this month's numbers. We've had our best quarter ever in terms of productivity and profits. But even more importantly, our employee satisfaction scores are higher than any other branch in the company." Emma smiled warmly as she looked at the reports. The numbers were impressive, but they told a story that was about much more than money. They showed that when people felt respected and valued at work, they did their best work naturally. "That's wonderful news, Margaret," Emma replied. "But I have to tell you, I'm most proud of something else entirely. In the past 6 months, we've had 15 job seekers from minority backgrounds accept positions here at this office. These are incredibly talented people with great skills and fresh ideas, real talent that James Walker would have dismissed without even giving them a fair chance." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "It's amazing how much stronger our team has become. We have people from so many different backgrounds bringing their unique perspectives to our work. The creative solutions they come up with for our clients' problems are better than anything we achieved before." Emma had worked hard to transform not just the Manchester office, but her entire company. She had established something called the Second Chance Foundation, which helped people who had experienced workplace discrimination find new opportunities and rebuild their confidence. The foundation provided job training, interview coaching, and legal support for workers who had been treated unfairly. Emma often traveled around England speaking at business conferences and university events. She shared her story about going undercover and discovering the truth about James Walker's behavior. Her speeches encouraged other business leaders to take workplace discrimination seriously and inspired workers to speak up when they witnessed unfair treatment. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, Emma was working in her London office when her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Thompson, there's a young woman here who would like to speak with you. She says her name is Grace and that you helped her whole months ago." Emma's face lit up with recognition. "Please, send her in right away." Grace entered the office looking completely different from the last time Emma had seen her. Gone was the defeated. hopeless expression she had worn after her terrible interview with James Walker. Now Grace stood tall with confidence, wearing a professional outfit and carrying herself like someone who knew her own worth. "Miss Thompson, I hope you don't mind me stopping by without an appointment," Grace said, her voice strong and clear. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did." Emma stood up and walked round her desk to greet Grace properly. "Of course. I don't mind, please. Sit down and tell me how you've been doing." Grace settled into a comfortable chair and took a deep breath before speaking. "After what happened with Mr. Walker during my interview, I honestly thought my career was over before it even started. I felt so ashamed and worthless. I started to believe that maybe he was right about me, that maybe I wasn't good enough for a professional job." Emma felt her heart ache as she listened to Grace describe those dark feelings. She remembered her own emotions after enduring James's cruel treatment during their fake interview. "But then I heard about what you did," Grace continued, her voice getting stronger. "When the story came out in the newspapers about how you went undercover and caught him. It changed everything for me. I realized that the problem wasn't with me. It was with him. You showed me that his behavior was wrong and illegal, not something I should just accept." Grace's eyes began to sparkle with excitement. "I wanted to tell you that I just got hired at a wonderful technology company here in London. The interview process was completely different from what I experienced with Mr. Walker. They asked me about my skills and experience. They wanted to know about my ideas and my goals. They treated me like a real person with valuable contributions to make." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to Grace's success story. "Grace, I'm so incredibly proud of you, but I want you to understand something important. You got that job because of your own strength, your own qualifications, and your own determination. I just helped level the playing field a little bit. Maybe," Grace said with a smile. "But you also showed me that I deserved to be treated with respect. You taught me that I didn't have to accept discrimination and harassment as normal parts of looking for a work." After Grace left, Emma sat quietly in her office thinking about her grandmother's wise words. "Stay strong. Love. Justice finds a way." Her grandmother had been right. But Emma had learned that justice didn't just happen by accident. It required people to be brave, to take risks, and to transform their own painful experiences into positive change for others. Emma walked to her office window and looked out at the busy London streets below. Thousands of people were walking to their jobs, sitting in interviews, trying to build better lives for themselves and their families. She knew that somewhere out there, other people were probably facing the same kind of discrimination and harassment that James Walker had inflicted on so many job seekers. But now there were also more people willing to stand up and speak out against injustice. Emma's story had inspired other business leaders to examine their own companies more carefully. Workers who had been suffering in silence were finding the courage to report inappropriate behavior. The cycle of positive change was spreading, one brave act inspiring another, creating ripples of hope that would reach far beyond what any single person could imagine. The end.